What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. All right. So we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 22 right now. For a little bit of context, because I feel like it's related, the last subheading in the last chapter was just titled Various Regulations. So, I'm pretty sure this first section of chapter 22 here is going to be more various regulations. But yeah, still Moses giving encouragement, suggestions, commands, all that kind of stuff for basically before the Israelites go into the Promised Land to take it over and settle in it and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. I think that's all I got for context. So, here we go. Deuteronomy 22. If you see your neighbor's ox or sheep or goat wandering away, don't ignore your responsibility. Take it back to its owner. If its owner does not live nearby, or you don't know who the owner is, take it to your place and keep it until the owner comes looking for it. Then you must return it. Do the same if you find your neighbor's donkey, clothing, or anything else your neighbor loses. Don't ignore your responsibility. Okay, so basically just so there's a couple of things, I guess, related to this. Number one, if you find something belonging to your neighbor, don't just ignore it because, somebody else with more malicious intent could snag it, or an animal could destroy whatever is in question, or, in the case of clothing or other belongings, the wind could carry it away. So, don't just ignore something that you come across and you know belongs to your neighbor. That's the first part of it, kinda. Second part is if it's, an animal or something like that, there might be, some taking care of it that would need to be done. Just because, you don't want the animal to die while in your possession because you're trying to keep that safe for your neighbor. Also, the kind of a third part is don't try and keep it for yourself then. You know it's not yours. You know it belongs to your neighbor. Finders keepers does not apply in this situation. In fact, honestly, for the most part, that's sort of a terrible notion. But, point is, don't get too attached and or start thinking that it's yours too much. Now, if it becomes a really long time and your neighbor still doesn't really come to get it, maybe they've forgotten about it or whatever, or they don't really miss it that bad. So then, maybe, I don't know. It's maybe kind of sort of yours. But again, there shouldn't be an expectation that it's yours, especially not really early on. Anyway. Okay. Moving on to verse 4. If you see that your neighbor's donkey or ox has collapsed on the road, do not look the other way. Go and help your neighbor get it back on its feet. Kind of a similar notion of just being helpful. Although this is more specifically, your neighbor's present and you're directly helping them. Okay, verse 5. A woman must not put on men's clothing, and a man must not wear women's clothing. Anyone who does this is detestable in the sight of the Lord your God. Now, this is one of those things where slightly controversial today. In fact, I was just watching a video about, like, school dress codes, or just dress codes in general, and people intentionally doing things like this just in order to point out the flaws of said dress code. So, like, I'm not gonna say any and all instances of this are bad. Also, I wonder if this was one of those commands that was more so like, there are people around you who do this, and God doesn't like what those people are doing. It is a symbol of the things that they do that God doesn't like. Therefore, you don't do it. There's just, I guess, like, keep that in mind as we're reading through these, and realize that that may have been the real motivation for some of these commands. Almost akin to, like, you know, whether or not something actually represents, you know, gang violence or some other controversial topic, school dress codes want to avoid articles of clothing that might represent those things just because they want no association with the obvious thing that is not okay. But anyway, plus there's a little bit of crossover nowadays. A little bit. I'm not gonna say a ton, but, like, jeans. Granted, there's usually stuff that's specifically designed for women and stuff more so designed for men, but, like, it's not, I don't know. It's not like I'd put that stuff entirely out of the question. So anyway, moving on to verse 6 now. If you happen to find a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground, and there are young ones or eggs in it with the mother sitting in the nest, do not take the mother with the young. You may take the young, but let the mother go, so that you may prosper and enjoy a long life. So, most of us nowadays tend to think of this being like the opposite thing around, where it's like, you know, there's kind of that, I don't know if rumor is quite the best word, but that thought that gets floated around that says, you know, oh, you can't touch you can't touch the baby chicks or whatever. I don't know if chicks is quite the right word for all birds, but anyway, you can't touch the baby birds because, like, the mother is gonna smell your scent and it'll cause the mother to abandon her young. That's not necessarily true from what I've heard, but this is kind of saying the opposite. It's like, don't take the mother away. And I am not really sure what the thought process is there, other than, you know, the mother is already, you know, a grown adult animal that could, you know, still produce more offspring, I guess, or something. I don't know. And the young ones, it's not really as sure yet. Again, most of us would tend to kind of think the opposite, where it's like, okay, if we're wanting to spare anything in this situation, we would think, okay, spare the young one, because they still have, you know, a very full life ahead of them to potentially live out. But also, like, if you take the mother away from the young, you're leaving the young defenseless. Whereas, if you take even, I mean, maybe not if you took all the young, but if you took some of the young and left the mother then the mother's still there to, help raise whichever young birds are left. So I guess maybe that's the thought process there. Okay. Verse 8. When you build a new house, you must build a railing around the edge of its flat roof. That way you will not be considered guilty of murder if someone falls from the roof. Because I guess going up to the roof was common. Especially, I could see it being more common with flat roofs. There are a lot of houses nowadays that don't have flat roofs. But, yeah, you've got examples in other places in the Bible of people going up to the roof for certain purposes. So, yeah, I guess just trying to help keep people safe. Okay, on to verse 9. You must not plant any other crop between the rows of your vineyard. If you do, you are forbidden to use either the grapes from the vineyard or the other crop. Okay, there's probably also some practicality in this because, if you're mixing crops especially in a vineyard, which is specifically designated to grow grapes, then, could mess up the way the grapes grow, or... but I think part of the reason for this is that, there's supposed to be room to get between them and ultimately leave, poor folks with the potential to go through and, pick some of the grapes for themselves just to kind of try and stay alive. There's other possibilities there, but that's what seems like the most likely primary motivation to me. Anyway, verse 10. You must not plow with an ox and a donkey harnessed together. It's uneven workload is what makes the most sense there to me. You must not wear clothing made of wool and linen woven together. Why specifically wool and linen, I don't know, but, they are fairly different fabrics as well. And this is one of the... there's a fair number of these things where it's kind of makes me glad this isn't necessarily expected of us today. And verse 12 says, you must put 4 tassels on the hem of the cloak with which you cover yourself, on the front, back, and sides. Most of us don't cover ourselves with cloaks these days, so it's kind of irrelevant. Not entirely sure why that was the case with the 4 tassels, to be honest with you. So anyway, moving along to the next subsection, starting with verse 13. Suppose a man marries a woman, but after sleeping with her, he turns against her and publicly accuses her of shameful conduct, saying, when I married this woman, I discovered she was not a virgin. Then the woman's father and mother must bring the proof of her virginity to the elders as they hold court at the town gate. Her father must say to them, I gave my daughter to this man to be his wife, and now he has turned against her. He has accused her of shameful conduct, saying, I discovered that your daughter was not a virgin. But here is the proof of my daughter's virginity. Then they must spread her bedsheet before the elders. The elders must then take the man and punish him. They must also fine him 100 pieces of silver, which he must pay to the woman's father, because he publicly accused a virgin of Israel of shameful conduct. The woman will then remain the man's wife, and he may never divorce her. Okay, so there's a lot in this that really doesn't make so much sense with modern times. Um, and I'm not even going to claim to be able to make sense of the majority of it. But the obvious part is, like, okay, if you're making a false accusation, that deserves some sort of punishment. And then I guess there's the fine that is sort of part of the punishment, but it also says that in addition to, quote, punishing him. So, I'm not quite sure what the punishment then would be, other than, I mean, it previously, or did it, I don't know, sorry, brain all over the place. But there is mention at some point of, punishments with lashes and whatnot, whipping type of stuff. So maybe that was the undescribed punishment in question. But, yeah. Anyway. Do a bad thing, get bad results. Especially if it's found out that you've done that. And then it's like, even further, it says, well, now because you've tried to do her wrong, you don't have the option of divorcing her anymore. Because it's clear you have not the best intentions for this woman. So your divorce would just possibly make her situation even worse. Although, nowadays, it might not necessarily be practical to stay in a relationship like that. Although, today the woman has the ability to divorce the husband if the situation is actually, like, abusive or anything like that. But, long story short, it's like, well, okay, if a claim about this is made, there needs to be some sort of evidence one way or the other. In fact, I think it's going to get into that a little bit more. So maybe I should read on before I, start talking about more details of the proceedings related to this. So, verse 20. But suppose the man's accusations are true, and he can show that she was not a virgin. The woman must be taken to the door of her father's home, and there the men of the town must stone her to death, for she has committed a disgraceful crime in Israel by being promiscuous while living in her parents' home. In this way, you will purge this evil from among you. So, it kind of implies here that, first off, that, a divorced woman potentially would not remarry. Or at the very least, in all this, that, like, if the assumption going into the marriage is that the woman's a virgin, and it turns out not to be the case, then, yeah, there was some sort of promiscuity going on, and because of the time frame and really trying to set God's people apart in their, behavior in particular, then, yeah, that was not really okay among God's people. And still, generally, like, even if it's allowed nowadays, it's often not particularly beneficial. It can definitely complicate things. So, whatever the case happens to be, if a man makes these accusations, there has to be some sort of, way of being able to testify to that. I'm not 100% sure what that would be. In the case of it being false, it specifically mentioned bed sheets. I'm not sure I want to get too much into detail of what the possibilities could be there. So maybe I shouldn't dwell on that too much, but yeah. Proof had to be shown one way or the other, and then either punishment for the man or for the woman would ensue. So anyway, it's moving on to verse 22. If a man is discovered committing adultery, both he and the woman must die. In this way, you will purge Israel of such evil. Again, just straight up this is in the realm of being promiscuous that God absolutely did not tolerate at this time. And honestly, I'm pretty sure it's still something that God would not really approve of. It's more so with like divorce and remarriage and different things like that today's culture brings some things into question. But that's only kind of tangentially related. Don't really need to get into that too much at the moment. Okay. Verse 23. Suppose a man meets a young woman, a virgin who is engaged to be married, and he has sexual intercourse with her. If this happens within a town, you must take both of them to the gates of that town and stone them to death. The woman is guilty because she did not scream for help. The man must die because he violated another man's wife. In this way, you will purge this evil from among you. So, I guess the not screaming for help kind of implies that the woman wanted it and or was part of the, sexual deviance, aka promiscuity. And I guess that's why she gets stoned to death in this case. Because again, it's saying if it happens within a town. We'll get to what happens outside of a town here in a bit. But like, if it's within a town and she was screaming, somebody would probably be able to hear her. And of course the man just violated another man's wife. Not okay. Yeah. So then, more on that kind of situation in verse 25. But if the man meets the engaged woman out in the country and he rapes her, then only the man must die. Do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no crime worthy of death. She is as innocent as a murder victim. Since the man raped her out in the country, it must be assumed that she screamed, but there was no one to rescue her. So, yeah. Kind of gives the benefit of the doubt to the woman there. But I mean, it's, with the assumed situation here, it's kind of like the man initiating it is obviously at fault. But, okay, here's the modern twist I would also add to this, just because of, current culture and situations, like, reverse the roles. And I would still apply I would then apply the man's punishment in this situation to the woman, and vice versa. Because, like, in this broken world in which we live, that's a thing that happens. Women also end up, it used the word rape here, so I'm not going to shy away from it. Women also end up raping young men sometimes. Possibly even older men, although that's less likely. But still, the big thing I would say is that the initiator is in all circumstances, due punishment and is definitely doing what's wrong in God's eyes. The one who's not initiating, if they go along with it, then this basically states that they're also deserving of punishment. But if they resisted, or it can't be verified that they didn't resist, basically meaning there's some possibility that they did, then, there's not any fault there. They were the ones who were forced into a situation that they didn't want to be in. Anyway, a couple more verses here to wrap up the chapter and this kind of awkward topic. Anyway, verse 28. Suppose a man has intercourse with a young woman who is a virgin, but is not engaged to be married. If they are discovered, he must pay her father 50 pieces of silver. Then he must marry the young woman because he violated her, and he may never divorce her as long as he lives. A man must not marry his father's former wife, for this would violate his father. Okay, so that's all the verses in the chapter. So, I guess because the young woman is not engaged or married in this case, then I guess there was, an emphasis on relational purity, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, and loyalty. Especially related to the women, their virginity was, held with special regard, and, violating that and then trying to be rid of such a woman was not really okay, because then that made it so she, at least in, the culture of that day, it made it so she wasn't really suitable for a future husband because of the emphasis on that purity. I just realized I missed all the footnotes along the way. Up here early on, as far as the whole sheep or goat wandering away, footnote says don't hide yourself rather than don't ignore your responsibility. It's still kind of the same notion of don't shy away from helping out in that situation. Footnote B down here, Hebrew says 100 shekels of silver, so it's just more specifically which pieces were in question here. And then, let's see, footnote C is down here at the 50 pieces of silver. Again, that's 50 shekels. Which had more so to do with the weight than the value, because the value could have changed, but a shekel was still a shekel. And footnote here, verse 22:30 is numbered 23:1 in the Hebrew text. And I guess whenever we get to the next chapter, that will perhaps make it a little clearer why it's separated here, at least in this version, quite possibly in other versions of the Bible. Oh yeah, the whole thing about, marrying father's former wife. First off, that's just kind of awkward. Second, in a lot of cases, at least, that former wife could very well have been your mother. But even if it wasn't your mother, there was still, like, kind of almost a stepmother relation there, at least. So, like, that's still not really okay. Stepmother was still very much considered motherly figure, especially in these days when there could have been, you know, like, multiple wives of one husband, and, like, both of them could have, you know, helped with household responsibilities and other things. Like, if the father did have multiple wives, they would have all still been part of the same family, often living under one roof. So, yeah, just all kinds of weird and awkwardness around that. And, I mean, it's not surprising then that God would not be so okay with that. Also, like, father and son marrying the same woman would also relate a bit back to that whole purity thing, where that was held in high regard. So yeah, not really a good thing. God was not okay with it, especially in this context. But anyway, I guess that wraps up my thoughts on Deuteronomy chapter 22. Okay, so we got a couple of random laws mixed in there at the beginning, or commands, to possibly be more accurate. And then we got some stuff about purity, which is kind of an awkward subject to cover. But I mean, it was one of those things where, like, they kind of needed to know this for, you know, daily life. Maybe not like daily per se, but I mean, somebody was bound to encounter these situations. Anywho, yeah, so that does it for this chapter. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel, and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. Feel free to follow me on Rumble, Twitter, Instagram, any of the stuff listed down in the description. And below there, leave comments with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.